In the final weeks of World War II, with Nazi Germany defeated and Japan still fighting, the President of the United States shared the most dangerous secret in human history with the man who commanded the Allied victory in Europe. What followed was not agreement, but a warning. Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied forces, believed the atomic bomb should never be used. Harry S. Truman, newly sworn in, burdened with ending the war, believed it had to be. This was not a debate between cowards and killers. It was a collision between military judgment, political reality, intelligence uncertainty, and moral consequence. And once the secret was spoken aloud, there was no turning back.
By the summer of 1945, the war in Europe was over, but peace was not yet secured. Adolf Hitler was dead. Berlin lay in ruins, and in a former imperial palace outside the shattered German capital, the leaders of the Allied world gathered to decide the future. Harry S. Truman had been president for just over 3 months. Franklin Roosevelt had died suddenly in April, taking with him secrets few men alive fully understood. One of them was the Manhattan Project, a weapons program so vast and compartmentalized that even many senior commanders knew almost nothing about it. Truman arrived at Potsdam, still absorbing the weight of his office. He had never ordered a world-ending decision before. Now one loomed. Dwight Eisenhower was different. He had commanded millions of men across continents. He understood logistics, casualties, morale, and surrender. He was not naive about war, but he was deeply skeptical of unnecessary force. On July 16th, while Truman was en route, the atomic bomb had been successfully tested in New Mexico. It worked. The world had changed, though most of it didn't know yet. Now Truman had to decide who should know and what to do next.
Sometime during the conference, Truman pulled Eisenhower aside for a private walk. There were no microphones, no formal notes, just two men, both destined to become presidents, standing at the edge of history. Truman told Eisenhower that the United States now possessed a weapon of unprecedented power, one bomb capable of destroying an entire city. He explained that it had been successfully tested. Then he asked the most important question of the war: should we use it against Japan? Eisenhower was stunned, not by the existence of the bomb, but by the assumption behind the question. According to his later memoirs, Eisenhower immediately objected. Japan, he argued, was already defeated in practical terms. Its navy was shattered, its air force crippled, its cities burning under conventional bombing, its economy strangled by blockade. Dropping the bomb, Eisenhower believed, was militarily unnecessary and morally dangerous. He warned Truman that America should avoid shocking the world with a weapon that would forever redefine warfare, especially if victory could be achieved without it. Truman listened, but he did not agree.
Eisenhower's objection was sincere, but it was also incomplete. What Eisenhower did not fully grasp was the depth of division inside Japan's leadership. American intelligence, including intercepted communications, revealed a government deadlock between surrender and continued resistance. Hardliners still believed a decisive homeland battle could force better terms. Truman, meanwhile, faced a brutal calculation. Military planners estimated that an invasion of Japan could cost hundreds of thousands of American lives, possibly more. The war had already claimed over 350,000 U.S. dead. Truman believed his primary duty was to end it as fast as possible. There was also geopolitics. The Soviet Union was preparing to enter the war against Japan. A prolonged conflict could reshape Asia and empower Stalin. Truman knew the bomb would not just end a war, it would send a message. Later critics would say Eisenhower was ill-informed. Others would argue Truman was coldly pragmatic. Still others would claim the bomb prevented World War III by showing humanity its own destruction. At Potsdam, none of that was certain. Only one thing was clear. Once the decision was made, it could never be undone.
Eisenhower's confidence that Japan was already defeated rested on conventional military logic. From the outside, the empire was collapsing. Cities were burning from firebombing raids. Supply lines were severed. Starvation loomed. But inside Tokyo, logic was no longer unanimous. Japan's Supreme War Council was split evenly, 3 members favoring surrender, 3 demanding continued resistance. The deciding vote belonged to Emperor Hirohito, who had never directly intervened in military policy before. Hardliners believed one last catastrophic battle could force the Allies into negotiating terms that preserved Japan's imperial system. American intelligence knew this stalemate existed, but how far Japan would go remained uncertain. Would they surrender after a demonstration, after Soviet entry, or only after unimaginable shock? Eisenhower, commanding from Europe, was not deeply embedded in Pacific intelligence channels. He saw Japan as a defeated military force. Truman saw Japan as an unpredictable political regime capable of sacrificing millions. This gap between battlefield assessment and intelligence reality would shape everything that followed.
Behind Truman's thinking was a plan few Americans had ever heard of. Operation Downfall, the invasion of Japan itself. It would be the largest amphibious assault in human history, dwarfing even D-Day. The first phase, Operation Olympic, targeted Kyushu. The second, Operation Coronet, aimed straight at Tokyo. Military estimates varied wildly, but even conservative projections warned of massive casualties, American and Japanese alike. Truman had read the casualty reports. He had seen what Okinawa cost, over 12,000 Americans dead and more than 100,000 Japanese soldiers killed, many civilians among them. Intelligence suggested Japan was preparing to mobilize civilians, including women and children, for national resistance. To Truman, the atomic bomb represented not just power, but finality, a weapon that might end the war in days instead of years. To Eisenhower, it represented a dangerous precedent, one that would redefine warfare forever. Both men believed they were preventing catastrophe. They simply disagreed on which catastrophe was worse.
Contrary to popular belief, America's atomic monopoly was already compromised. Soviet intelligence had penetrated the Manhattan Project years earlier. Scientists, engineers, and couriers passed critical information to Moscow. Some motivated by ideology, others by fear of imbalance. Joseph Stalin knew far more than Truman realized. At Potsdam, when Truman casually informed him of a new weapon of unusual destructive force, Stalin showed little reaction. Later intelligence confirmed why. The Soviet bomb program was already underway. This reality complicated Truman's decision. A demonstration blast or delayed use might not prevent nuclear proliferation. The genie was already out of the bottle. Eisenhower later argued that using the bomb accelerated the arms race. Truman believed the race had already begun, and that failing to act decisively might weaken America's position in a post-war world dominated by nuclear power. The bomb was no longer just a weapon. It was a signal to allies, enemies, and history itself.
Without warning, a single B-29 bomber appeared over Hiroshima. At 8:15 a.m., the atomic bomb detonated above the city. In an instant, tens of thousands were dead. Heat vaporized bodies. Shock waves flattened structures. Survivors wandered through a landscape beyond comprehension. News reached Washington within hours. The weapon had worked exactly as designed. For Truman, it confirmed his belief that the war could now end quickly. For Eisenhower, it confirmed his deepest fear. Humanity had crossed a line from which it could never return. Yet Japan did not surrender. The military leadership was stunned, but not unified. Some argued the Americans could not possibly possess more than one bomb. Others demanded proof. The deadlock remained. The world had changed forever, but the war was not over. 3 days later, a second atomic bomb fell, this time on Nagasaki. To many historians, this moment became the fulcrum of the entire debate. If one bomb was meant as a warning, why a second so soon? Inside Japan, the effect was devastating. Combined with the Soviet declaration of war that same day, the shock finally broke the deadlock. Emperor Hirohito intervened directly, overruling the hardliners and ordering surrender. To Truman's defenders, the second bomb proved necessity, not cruelty. It ended the war. It prevented an invasion. It saved American lives. To Eisenhower and other critics, it proved excess, that the first bomb alone should have been enough. History would never fully resolve the argument. But on August 15, 1945, the war finally ended.
For the first time in Japanese history, the voice of the emperor was broadcast directly to the people. The message was carefully worded, restrained, and solemn. Hirohito did not mention surrender explicitly. Instead, he spoke of enduring the unendurable for the survival of the nation. Behind the scenes, the decision had been agonizing. Even after Nagasaki, elements of the military attempted a coup to prevent surrender. Officers seized radio stations. Orders were forged. Only decisive imperial intervention stopped further bloodshed. This reality complicates later judgments. Japan did not collapse immediately after Hiroshima, nor did it surrender solely because of Soviet entry. It was the combined shock, atomic destruction, geopolitical isolation, and imperial authority that finally ended the war. Truman would later argue this proved his point. Without overwhelming force, Japan would not have surrendered. Eisenhower would argue the opposite, that Japan was already seeking a way out, and that time, not terror, would have ended the conflict. The war was over. The argument had only begun.
Across the United States, celebrations erupted. For millions of families, the bomb meant sons and husbands would come home alive. To them, the weapon was not immoral, it was merciful. In Europe, reactions were more subdued. Allied leaders understood immediately that something irreversible had occurred. Winston Churchill called it a marvel of science, but privately worried about its consequences. Scientists who built the bomb were divided, some proud, others horrified. Public understanding was limited.
Few grasped radiation sickness. Photographs of charred cities circulated, but the long-term human cost remained invisible. This gap in perception shaped early opinion. Many Americans believed the bomb had ended the war cleanly. Critics like Eisenhower were seen by some as detached from Pacific realities. History, however, was only beginning to collect evidence, and the most disturbing truths were still buried beneath the ruins. Months later, journalists and doctors entered Hiroshima and Nagasaki. What they found challenged every early assumption. Survivors were dying weeks after the blast, without visible wounds. Hair fell out, skin blistered, internal organs failed. Children were born malformed. Radiation sickness, barely understood at the time, revealed a new category of suffering. One American journalist, John Hersey, documented these horrors in Hiroshima, published in The New Yorker in August 1946. His account stripped away abstraction and replaced it with names, faces, and lives. For the first time, the moral argument gained human clarity. Eisenhower's warning that the bomb would shock world opinion and degrade moral standards no longer sounded theoretical. Yet defenders countered, every war weapon has unseen victims. Firebombing Tokyo killed more civilians than Hiroshima. War itself was the crime. The debate hardened, not between good and evil, but between necessity and restraint.
Eisenhower did not immediately challenge Truman publicly. Loyalty, unity, and Cold War realities restrained him. But over time, his position became unmistakable. In his memoir Crusade in Europe and later interviews, Eisenhower stated plainly that Japan was already on the brink of surrender. He described telling Truman the bomb was unnecessary and morally troubling. Critics pushed back. They argued Eisenhower lacked full Pacific intelligence, that he underestimated Japanese resistance, that hindsight made his objections easier. Eisenhower never denied these uncertainties. His argument was different. Even if Japan resisted, he believed the United States should not be the first to introduce nuclear annihilation into warfare. By the time Eisenhower became president himself, the arms race he feared was fully underway. The bomb had not ended war, it had transformed it.
Supporters of Truman argue history proved him correct. Nuclear weapons, they say, prevented World War III by showing humanity its own destruction. The bomb saved American lives. It ended the deadliest war in history. Critics argue the opposite, that the bomb normalized mass civilian annihilation and launched an arms race that still threatens humanity. Both claims contain truth. What cannot be denied is this: Truman made his decision under crushing uncertainty. Eisenhower voiced his objection from hard-earned military judgment. Neither man acted lightly. The atomic bomb did not just end World War II. It forced the world to live permanently under the shadow of its own extinction. And that, perhaps, is the real legacy of their disagreement.
After Potsdam, Truman and Eisenhower rarely spoke publicly about their disagreement. There was no dramatic fallout, no public feud. What remained was silence, a silence shaped by responsibility. Truman carried the burden of the decision alone. Eisenhower carried the burden of dissent. Neither man attempted to exploit the disagreement for political advantage. This restraint mattered. It reflected a generation that understood the difference between disagreement and disloyalty. Privately, Truman never claimed the decision was easy. He insisted it was necessary. Eisenhower never claimed moral superiority. He insisted it was avoidable. This quiet distance between them reveals something often lost in modern debates. History is not made by villains and saints, but by leaders navigating incomplete information under unbearable pressure. The absence of public conflict does not mean agreement. It means gravity.
Modern historians benefit from documents Truman and Eisenhower never saw together. Declassified intercepts, Soviet archives, Japanese records all reveal a fractured reality. Japan was exploring surrender, but not unconditionally. The military still controlled much of the government. Even after the emperor's intervention, officers attempted armed resistance. At the same time, U.S. intelligence exaggerated some invasion casualty estimates after the fact. Early projections varied widely, and certainty was impossible. This matters because both men acted rationally, based on different slices of truth. Eisenhower judged Japan's military collapse. Truman judged Japan's political will. Neither view was complete, but both were defensible. History does not resolve this tension. It explains it.
Before Hiroshima, war destroyed armies. After Hiroshima, it threatened humanity. Military doctrine changed instantly. Cities became targets by definition. Civilians were no longer collateral, they were central. Eisenhower understood this shift early. He feared a future where war planning assumed total annihilation as a tool of policy. Truman understood it differently. He believed demonstrating the weapon's horror early might prevent its routine use later. Both men feared nuclear war. Both believed their position reduced its likelihood. The tragedy is that neither could fully control what came next.
Within 4 years, the Soviet Union detonated its own atomic bomb. The American monopoly ended. Hydrogen weapons followed, far more destructive than anything used in Japan. Eisenhower watched this unfold with grim familiarity. As president, he faced decisions Truman had once faced, but now multiplied. He resisted calls for preventive nuclear war. He warned against the military-industrial complex. He sought arms control, even as deterrence became policy. The bomb had not prevented global tension. It had institutionalized it. Truman's supporters argued this was inevitable. Eisenhower believed it was accelerated. History offers no counterfactual, only consequence. Was the bomb justified? Supporters count lives saved. Americans who never landed on Japanese beaches. Japanese civilians spared invasion, famine, and urban warfare. Critics count lives lost. Tens of thousands instantly, many more slowly. They count the normalization of nuclear terror. Both sides present numbers. Neither can measure trauma, precedent, or fear. Eisenhower's objection was not mathematical. It was civilizational. He feared what humanity accepted the moment the bomb fell. Truman feared what humanity might endure if it didn't. This is not a question history answers cleanly, because it is not a clean question. The conversation at Potsdam is remembered not because one man was right and the other wrong, but because both were willing to confront the cost of their convictions. Eisenhower spoke when silence would have been easier. Truman decided when delay would have been safer. Leadership is not certainty. It is responsibility without escape. The atomic bomb forced humanity into a new age, but the disagreement between Truman and Eisenhower remains timeless, a reminder that power without conscience is dangerous, and conscience without action can be paralyzing.
History does not choose sides here. It asks whether we learned anything at all.
Decades after Hiroshima, historians gained access to documents Truman and Eisenhower never read side by side. Intelligence intercepts, Soviet archives, Japanese cabinet records. None delivered a definitive answer. Japan was closer to surrender than many Americans believed, but further than Eisenhower assumed. The invasion might have been catastrophic, or it might not have been. Demonstrations might have worked, or failed disastrously. Hindsight tempts certainty. History resists it. What survives instead is context, a war that had normalized mass death, leaders shaped by it, and decisions made without the comfort of moral clarity. The atomic bomb did not rewrite the past. It froze it, forever debated.
In the United States, the bomb is often remembered as the weapon that ended the war. In Japan, it is remembered as the moment civilians became the battlefield. These memories are not symmetrical, but they are both true. Memorials in Hiroshima and Nagasaki do not argue policy. They remember lives. American memorials honor those who never invaded. Eisenhower understood memory's power. He believed how the bomb was remembered would shape future decisions. Truman believed memory would fade, but deterrence would remain. Both misjudged something. Memory did not fade. It hardened.
Since 1945, nuclear weapons have not been used in war. Some credit Truman's decision for that restraint. The world saw the cost and stepped back. Others argue the world has simply been lucky. Eisenhower later warned that deterrence rested on perpetual fear, a fragile foundation for peace. As president, he sought arms limitation while maintaining readiness. The bomb became less a weapon than a condition of existence, shaping diplomacy, alliances, and crises. It did not end war. It redefined it.
Despite their disagreement, Truman and Eisenhower shared crucial beliefs. Neither wanted nuclear war. Neither celebrated the bomb. Neither dismissed its horror. They differed not in values, but in thresholds. Eisenhower believed morality should restrain capability. Truman believed responsibility required action. This distinction matters. It reminds us that ethical disagreement is not moral failure. History often reduces debates to winners and losers. This one resists simplification.
The Potsdam conversation echoes forward. What do leaders do when power outruns wisdom, when speed replaces certainty, when delay costs lives, but action costs innocence? These questions did not end in 1945. They reappear whenever technology promises decisive victory without moral cost. Eisenhower and Truman did not resolve the dilemma. They exposed it. And in doing so, they left the burden where it belongs, with those who inherit the power they unleashed.
What Eisenhower said to Truman at Potsdam was not a command, it was a warning. What Truman decided afterward was not indifference, it was judgment. History records the outcome, it does not absolve the cost. The atomic bomb ended World War II. It also ensured the world would never be the same. Between Eisenhower's restraint and Truman's resolve lies the permanent tension of leadership, choosing under uncertainty, acting without moral certainty, and living with consequences no apology can erase. That is not a lesson of the past. It is a warning for the future.
World War II was not shaped only by firepower, but by decisions made in rooms like Potsdam, often with no perfect answers. If you want more World War II stories told with accuracy, restraint, and historical context, subscribe to the channel. New documentaries examine the moments commanders, presidents, and ordinary people faced choices that history could not forgive or forget.